Maybe you don't want the new RTX 4000. What maybe you should really get is a cheap RTX 3000. I'm going to tell you guys why. First, you guys have seen the announcement from Nvidia with the new RTX 4090, the 4080, and sort of the 4080 Lite, which sucks for many reasons. Primarily, it should have been a 4070, but they wanted to keep that really expensive price. If you noticed, Nvidia also did something that's very unique this generation. They kept RTX 3000 in the current lineup. They list the new stuff as the high-end enthusiast, meaning the stuff you're going to have to pay a lot of money to get, and then the older stuff, something like this, which is still reasonably very good. This is a 3070 Ti, not an old or outdated GPU by any means. It's still going to do ray tracing. It's going to have DLSS 2.0, maybe not the new flavor of 3.0 that the new stuff has, but if your particular game doesn't support that, who knows what's going to happen. If you're playing Flight Simulator 2020, you probably should get a 4090 if you have the whole flight sim setup already, because DLSS 3.0 looks like it's going to be amazing in that game. Then the 4090 makes complete sense if you have that in your budget. Not everybody wants to spend $1,600 plus on a gaming graphics card, especially when you stop and consider how cheap RTX 3000 is getting. Of course, retail prices have gotten really cheap, but I'm also talking about secondhand GPUs. Something like this, an RTX 3070, you can pick up right now for sometimes around $500 or even less, which is less than its $599 MSRP. And the higher up you go, the 3090 Ti, 3090, they've come down to well below $1,000 for used models. Especially something like a 3090 Ti that just came out in the beginning of the year. Not too many crypto miners got it if you're scared about buying mining GPUs. So something like that, as it gets lower and lower to 900, 800, 700, that's going to be a reasonably cheap GPU that's extremely high end. And the early speculation is that the 3090 Ti may still outperform at least the 12 gigabyte 4080, which is going to come in considerably more expensive than its $899 MSRP, because at the end of the day, it doesn't have a Founders Edition, and most likely the AIBs are going to charge well over $1,000 for it. And when that GPU actually comes out, you're going to see the RTX 3000 prices decrease even further. When is going to be a good time to buy a cheap RTX 3000 GPU, you may ask? Well, right now we're going through a transition phase as RTX 4000 has just been announced, but not yet fully released. I think as RTX 4000 starts to actually physically hit the store shelves, that's when RTX 3000 may start to go down in price a bit more. 4090 is going to be first, coming up now in October. Then of course in November we'll have the other GPUs. But if you see a cheap price now, prices are definitely getting pretty low. There's always the chance they may go back up once the RTX 40,000 doesn't appear to be or as good, or maybe availability is not good. Because remember, even though we don't have the demand that we had before for these new GPUs, there still is some demand there from enthusiasts that will buy them, and Nvidia will artificially limit these GPUs like they've said they would do with the RTX 3000, reducing what they call the sell-in to their suppliers, distributors, the AIBs, because they have a lot of inventory in the channel, as they say it. So that means that they may not release too many RTX 4000. They may release them in waves as they start to see the demand and they start to sell out of more RTX 3000 out in the open market. Now, there's two things to keep in mind here. There are retail sales where it's going to be more expensive. You're always going to pay more than on the secondhand market, but of course you're more guaranteed to be able to return it if there's a problem. And you also have a more direct link to the actual warranty. The second thing here is the secondhand and the used market. I'm a big advocate of buying secondhand simply because you can reduce the price a significant amount. For example, if an RTX 3090 is still retailing for $899 if you walk into a store or you order it on Newegg, you can often find that same 3090 pretty close to new condition in many cases for a significant discount. That's certainly a significant savings games where you can use that money to buy another processor, upgrade your RAM, hard drives. That is definitely a pretty big amount to put back into your budget. Recently, I did make a video specifically on avoiding the RTX 3090. I think the 3090 Ti is the better GPU, not only performance-wise, price-wise, it's getting pretty low, very close to the price of a used 3090 on the secondhand market, but more importantly, the VRAM and overheating issues are much better managed on the RTX 3090 Ti because they changed the way the VRAM is on one side only, as opposed to the original 3090, which had many thermal pad issues from the factory. The VRAM just runs typically much hotter, and if you buy a used one, you could run into one that potentially was used incorrectly, especially by an inexperienced crypto miner would be the most likely scenario. Most of them do take care of their hardware. That's definitely a known fact, but there are a lot of new people that joined that craze, and a lot of them probably ran it to the thermal limit, therefore degrading the quality of that particular 3090. Some people even tried to open the GPUs up to change the thermal pads. Sounds like a good idea, but there's a lot that can go wrong when you try to put that cooler back. People would damage their coolers and even their PCB and brick their GPUs. So something to keep in mind when buying a used GPU in general, but the 3090 and any GPU with the G6X RAM, that VRAM that ran considerably hotter, certainly is going to be a little bit more susceptible to these type of issues. But otherwise, you go look for 3080s, 3070s, even 3090 if you're careful. You can find significant discounts, and it may actually be a better deal than RTX 4000. So if you do buy an RTX 3000 used, what exactly are you going to be missing out compared to the new generation? Well, right off the bat, obviously, you're going to save a lot of money. That's going to be a positive that you're not missing out on. But first is going to be the new technology, DLSS 3.0. That's basically the AI super sampling technology that's going to give you much better graphics for much less of a performance penalty, which you can still use DLSS 2.0, which is great. It works in many games, especially if you combine it with ray tracing, which you're still going to perform great on RTX 3000, depending on the GPU that you get. Of course, higher up that you go, it's always going to be better. DLSS 3.0, at least for now, because of the hardware on RTX 4000, that's going to be specific to RTX 4000 because it has powerful enough hardware to run it without issues. That's going to be really what gives some of the huge performance gains on the 4090 and 4080 in specific games when they put it in DLSS performance mode, like Nvidia did with, Flight Simulator and Portal and some of the other games that they showed off. But there's a good chance you may be playing a completely different game that's really not going to take advantage of that nearly as much, and DLSS 2.0 may be just fine for you. Remember, 3.0 is a new technology. It may have some growing pains as they, optimize it. Even Flight Simulator has to get certain updates still for it to be good. I tried the current DLSS on it, and it really wasn't all that great, but hopefully with the new update that they have coming out, may be significantly better. So, that's one big thing that right now is going to be exclusive to those GPUs, and you're just going to get a little bit lesser version of it on the RTX 3000, but you are paying a much lesser price as well, so it makes sense. It's a little bit less performance for less of a price. For most people, that should be a pretty decent trade-off. Now, there are a couple of other things that are interesting with the DLSS 3.0. Apparently, it can also reduce the power consumption of the GPU, depending on what it's doing, exactly what the game you're playing, what mode it is, which is certainly going to be welcomed news because these new RTX 4000 GPUs are certainly power hungry. The 4090 coming in at 450 watts. Of course, everything with the 4080, everything went up power-wise from the previous generation. Now, you're not going to have that necessarily with RTX 3000, but depending on the GPU that you get, it's certainly still going to be fairly decent in terms of its power consumption. I would say from the 3080 on down, power consumption is pretty reasonable. As you get into the 3080 Ti, that's when you start to go, well over 300 watts. Of course, the 3090 Ti, easy to expect 450 watts from that. So that's certainly pretty beefy power consumption without the DLSS 3.0. But once again, it's still within the upper limits of what I would consider reasonable. And when we get to 600 watts, maybe with a 4090 Ti, that's when it really starts to get very unreasonable in terms of GPU power consumption. But that is going to be a very high-end GPU, so you should have the power capacity to handle it, as well as everything else in your system. 450 watts is a lot, don't get me wrong, but that's like still acceptable for really, really high-end, if you know what I'm saying, because even 500 watts is attainable with a lot of these GPUs, like the Kingpin and for the 1.3, the Strix. A lot of them do go over to that 500 watts or more, depending on how you overclock it. DLSS 3.0, definitely a great innovation, definitely great features for the new generation, but you're paying a significant amount. You're going to be paying this generation what I like to call the Nvidia upgrade tax even more than normal, because they have to account for all of these RTX 3000 GPUs still in their inventory. Not only that, they have competition from their own supply, lines, their own inventory. Then they're going to have competition from the used market, because as Ethereum disappeared, mining has literally gone unprofitable and almost to zero for most people, except for the really hardcore people, meaning that a lot of GPUs are now flooding the market. And that's going to be the biggest competition that really it's going to go head to head with Nvidia, because like I said, on the used market, if you're careful, you can really find a great deal on a very high performing GPU and save a significant amount of money. Sure, the 4090 is a lot faster than a 3090 in many cases, especially when you consider ray tracing, but is it really worth that price difference for your specific game? It really may not. It may be a much smaller difference than you're imagining, because remember, we don't even have the real data and gaming benchmarks yet in the real world. We just have the cherry-picked information from Nvidia, which of course they're going to show the GPU in the best light possible. They're going to show it in the best case scenario, which is not going to be true all the way around, meaning that in real world use, that 3090 or even that 3080, 3070 Ti that I mentioned before that I have here, it's going to perform a lot closer to RTX 4000 in regular usage than you would be led to assume if you just looked at Nvidia's marketing. So that's something to keep in mind. And of course, it's just going to be so much cheaper, especially as RTX 4000 comes out. 3000 is going to go down even further, and 4000 likely will either stay at its own price that it is upon launch, or most likely with the AIBs, the pricing may increase, as we've seen with the last generation. Regardless of less demand, they want to keep a certain price premium, and Nvidia, I'm sure, will be happy just selling a little bit less if they can keep the price high and make sure that their products are seen as premium and not get a discount, because remember, they have not only their own GPUs to compete with and their shareholders to keep happy, but AMD as well as Intel are going to be hot on their tails. And I'm going to make another separate video on AMD specifically. They may change the game yet again with RDNA 3.0, possibly if they bring in something that's going to be very competitive with the 4080, which I believe they will. It could certainly take away a lot of market share depending on their availability and exactly what it's priced at. So that's going to be something to definitely keep an eye on as well. May make another decision process in your little decision tree when you consider used NVIDIA GPUs, RTX 4000, and now possibly RDNA 3 as well. We're going to have to see exactly how that performs. All right, guys, so let me know what you think down below. Would you buy a cheap RTX 3000? Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.